Thank you, everybody. I'm happy to see everybody today. I want to give you all a little bit of a heads up about something that you might see today. And if you do, I don't want you to be too surprised, okay? You will see behind me, there is a stairway and a passageway back there, back and forth. You might see a woman dart across there. I want to assure you that is not Lauren, that's my daughter, Carrie. Okay, just so you know, because our daughter comes over every Sunday to watch football with me and during football season, and then we watch golf during golf season. So she may be going back and forth. I don't be surprised. Gary, thank you so much for that introduction, and I had a great time talking to all of you the other night. And Gary gave me a really great quote that I have stolen and plan to use a lot. And sometimes if I'm not in one of my senior moments, I'll credit Gary. And then if I'm in one of my senior moments, I won't credit Gary. But when he started talking about the experience in an afterlife setting, that is the setting of What Dreams May Come, the film, he said, it's someone's experience in the afterlife. And I wanted to start there because I think it's a very important thing. Someone's experience in the afterlife. I'm going to talk about Lauren and I and how we started our communication and our constant communication since then. But I want to talk about one of the things that I get asked a lot, which is, what is the afterlife like? And I think it's very important that we talk about that up front, because Lauren and I do not believe that there is such a thing as the afterlife. It's someone's experience of the afterlife, as Gary put it. And we all have different experiences, according to, I believe, our experiences and our beliefs in life. It's just fascinating that people don't accept that as a given going in. So here we are living our life on this planet Earth, and there are so many different faiths and so many different pathways to God and so many visions and beliefs about an afterlife experience. What that afterlife experience is. Certainly the traditional religions of the planet have sometimes very dissimilar visions of the afterlife or what that might be. People on a spiritual experience have various different beliefs about that. So what are we to believe? That when we do shuffle off this mortal coil, and I'm going to get back to Hamlet in a minute, that we're going to go someplace where everybody's belief except for one has been wrong? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all. And so when we talk about our afterlife experience, and Lauren and I actually guard that pretty carefully because it's very personal with us. Is it Robert Monroe, the author? It is Robert Monroe. Had a wonderful phrase for different experiences in the afterlife, which is, according to your beliefs, you might actually gather with people on islands of consensual realities, which is a fascinating way to look at it. So when I'm asked about, well, but what is it? What is the afterlife like? Well, I know what our experience is because we had a conversation about it in detail about 8 months before Lauren transitioned, as to exactly what that would be and how it would be. And from what Lauren has given me little peeks at, that is what it is for us. So I wanted to start off with that. I also wanted to start off with that quote from Hamlet, which is, for in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil. That is probably the most famous quote from anything in Shakespeare. It's from Hamlet. And when you look at that quote, it's really fascinating. For in that sleep of death, not that finality of death, not that whatever, if we're in that sleep of death. Sleep denotes something from where we go and then we come out of. So it's a transition. What dreams may come indeed? What dreams of ours in our lifetime that we're now experience when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, not when we have died and there's nothing left of us. It's when we've transitioned from this place to the next one. What I'd like to do today, because I know this is a smaller group, and I love doing this because I'm going to do a little bit of time and talk about a few things, and then I'd really like to open it up for questions, because I think we can have a more dynamic relationship that way without me just talking to all of you. There are a few things that I wanted to say up front. Gary said that there is something in the introduction to our book about art imitating life, imitating art. And certainly that has been my experience. I know that I came to this lifetime with a purpose. I did not know what it was for a very long time, but I know it was a purpose. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, I was 5 years old, my birth father died. And my mother remarried. My birth father was a producer and a director in the 1940s at Columbia and other studios. He made movies with Abbott and Costello and Red Skelton. He discovered Lucille Ball, gave her first big movie, which was The Fuller Brush Girl. Red Skelton was his best friend. My sister, who is 8 years older than I am, I'm 75, so it makes her 83. I know she's not watching this, so she's not going to mind me giving her age, although she often refers to herself as my kid sister, and that's okay too. But she remembers a lot more of those days than I do, but I was born into that. That was the family that our souls chose, our interwoven souls chose. That was the body that, the family that was chosen for me, and Lauren was put in another family of filmmakers. When I was 5 or 6, my dad died, as I said. My mother remarried another film producer. So I was in the film industry from the time I was a child. I was also in spirituality from the time I was a child, because I used to tell my parents that there was a man in my wall every night. And they said, "Are you afraid?" And I said, "No, I love having him there. He's very comforting." It took me a long time to realize that that was my dad. And there was a couple of moments when I was working on movies that I got stuck in the middle of a very important decision and didn't know how to make it. And I would just walk alone by myself and say, "Dad," because my dad was a director and a producer, "what do I do?" And there was always an answer. And it was always the right answer. So I grew up around that. I grew up around loving movies like It's a Wonderful Life, Lost Horizon, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, films like that were all about what might be called supernatural, which we call spiritual. That was my life. I knew I was going to get involved in the film industry. I know it's a subject for another call, but Frank Sinatra was my godfather, which is a whole other story because of my dad giving him the part in From Here to Eternity. So I grew up around all of this. I was put in this milieu for a reason. I finally realized what the reason was. In 1976, I was 30. I walked in a bookstore. The clerk said, "Hey, we got this new book in by this author, Richard Matheson. It's the kind of stuff you love. You should buy this book." Richard Matheson had written a lot of the Twilight Zone episodes. He wrote I Am Legend. He wrote The Incredible Shrinking Man, extraordinary man, wound up being my spiritual mentor. So I took this book home, which was called Bid Time Return, another Shakespearean quote. And I read it overnight and I realized, okay, you know what? Now I got to get in the business, because this is the first movie I need to make. Not that I want to make, but I need to make. That book 3 years later became Somewhere in Time. I begged my way into a job in the film industry. from a man who had been close to my dad. Did I have connections? I did. Did I use them? I did. And I'm not embarrassed about that because it got my foot in the door. And the very first thing I did was find Richard Matheson, and I had lunch with him. And I said, look, this is why I got in the film business. I'm going to make this movie. I don't know how, I don't know when, I don't know where. Please trust me. Will you just have a handshake with me and we'll do this together? And he did. And 3 years later, it became Somewhere in Time. And any of you who might have any comments or anything else you want to do about Somewhere in Time, we can certainly do that as well. And so we have some great stories that are attached to how that film got made. While we were prepping Somewhere in Time to go shoot at Mackinac Island in 1979, or right before it in 1978, Richard Matheson gave me the galleys for what was going to be his next novel. And that was What Dreams May Come. And I read that overnight and realized, okay, that's the next crusade of my life. And boy, it was, because it took 20 years to get What Dreams May Come made for a whole bunch of different reasons, which we can also talk about as well. That led me into my life of spirituality in film. My business partner and I founded the Spiritual Cinema Circle, which some of you may have actually been a member of, that we operated for 16 years, where we sent out spiritually uplifting movies to people every month. I wound up producing and directing the film version of Conversations with God because Neil Donald Walsh was a very dear friend of mine, and we came up with the idea to do that, and we did. And a little movie about indigo, children called Indigo. So this was a part of my life. This was a significant part of my life. In 2003, I had been through 2 very unsuccessful marriages, had decided I was never going to get married again, was never going to have any kind of an intimate relationship in my life again, when the universe just laughed and said, okay, well, what do you think about this? And I went to a revival of What Dreams May Come that was being shown in a small theater outside of Portland here in a place called Gresham. And I was going to do a talk. And when I walked in the theater, there was a woman who was standing with her profile to me, and I was just drawn to her. And I walked up to her, and when she turned around, it was one of those moments that I know many of you have had in life. It's one of those unique moments. We just stared at each other. It seemed like minutes. It was probably 10 seconds. But when we talked about it later, we both had exactly the same feeling, which is, there she is. For Lauren, it was, there he is. We found each other on the night that we were supposed to. And that began the relationship between the two of us. We got married on New Year's Eve of 2006. It began the happiest, most joyous time of my entire life. Lauren and I were basically homebodies. We stayed together all the time. We had the same spirituality. We talked about what our experience in the afterlife would be. Lauren is a gifted intuitive. We had a lot of experiences about that. And then on January 3rd of 2018, I went to the gym in the morning, which I usually did. I went early. I came back. I kind of peeked upstairs at Lauren, who was still asleep. And I thought, this is a little strange, but she was up late last night. I know she came up to bed later than I did. So I got involved in things, and then I started to get concerned, and I went up in the room, and our dog, Lola, our lab, was lying completely against her, lying down, completely pushed up against her, didn't even raise her head when I walked in the room, and I walked around the bed and realized that something was very wrong. And I touched her, and she was cold, and I freaked out, as I know many of us have done, and went into an extremely deep sense of grief for a very long time that I am just beginning to, I'm not going to say emerge from, because I do believe that grief lasts as long as love does. It's been 4 years. The first 2 years, I don't remember at all, very little. And again, I know I'm talking to a number of you here who have had that same experience. We talk about this in our book, so I won't go into all of the details, But I had a dinner in September of that year with our dear friend Neil and his wife. And at that dinner, some amazingly phenomenological things happened. And I realized that all these notes that I had been making on Lauren communicating with me needed to be a book. And Neil said, I know what the title is. It's What Dreams Have Come. I became aware of the fact that I needed to do this book and that Lauren and I needed to write it together. And that's what we did. And that's the book that we have. And we wrote it primarily so that people like you and many others who have experiences with their loved ones after they have crossed the veil, who have communication, relationship, experiences, we're not alone and we're not crazy. And I realized when I started doing some of the research that this is a very widespread phenomenon. It's all over the world. There are millions of people who have this experience, but the problem is a lot of us are afraid to talk about it because we're afraid we're going to be rejected by our friends and by our family, and that people will think that we're crazy, but we're not. And so what we hope by doing with this book is by me saying, look at the experience of my life. All of these spiritual experiences that I had led to this moment, led to writing this book, because this is one of the reasons that I'm here. And I'm not doing anything else in the film industry. As I said, I'm 75, which is about 30 years too old to be doing anything in Hollywood nowadays anyway. But I don't do that anymore. I'm doing some consulting with a couple of people, but that's because they're making spiritual films and I want to help them. Other than that, I plan to spend whatever time I have left here talking about our book, talking about these experiences, encouraging others to do that. At the beginning of the call, Len and I had a brief conversation, as some of you saw, because Len was on the call 10 days ago, and I said then what I'm going to say now. I have an email called Stephen, S-T-E-P-H-E-N, Stephen, at whatdreamshavecome.com. Stephen at whatdreamshavecome.com. In our book and on our website, which is whatdreamshavecome.com, I invite people to be in touch with me and to share your experiences with me. Someone wrote me an email a little while ago saying, well, probably Stephen isn't reading this. It's probably some assistant, but I want to talk anyway. And I said to this lovely woman, and I'm saying to you, I don't have an assistant. No one reads these emails besides me. I made that guarantee to everybody. No one will ever read them. I will never quote you. It will be just a personal communication between the two of us. But I think it's important that people who want to express their own experiences have someone who is going through the experience in the same way to be able to share that with. With that, what I'd like to do, Wendy, is begin to talk to people and get some questions and some comments from people rather than me rattling on about other things that may or may not interest many of you. So I'd like to get to some more directed questions or directed comments. And as I said, it can be about dreams. It can be about somewhere in time. If you want to make a comment about Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which I also produced, it's probably not the right venue, but we could do it anyway. And I'm here to talk to people. So if we can open it up for questions, I'd love to do that. For the first 6 weeks after, thank you, Gloria. For the first 6 weeks after Lauren transitioned, we had no contact, or at least I wasn't aware that we had any contact. Now, maybe she had tried to get me sooner, but I was told by a couple of people that I'm very close to, one of whom is the medium Alison Dubois, who some of you may know, who's a good friend of mine, which is, she went to sleep and woke up on the other side. She had an undiscovered heart arrhythmia and passed very, very, very peacefully in her sleep and was pretty disoriented when she arrived on the other side, and it took her a while. So how did that happen? It's something I will never forget, Gloria, and it's going to sound, I think, very funny to a lot of you. And I hope you can get a smile out of it. So I watched a lot of things that I recorded on television to distract me from the grief that I was feeling and to make it bearable. And I recorded a lot of different TV series and things like that. It's important for me to note here that when I watch something like that, I never watch the coming attractions that they do after the end of every show, because I don't like to know what's coming. And I never read the credits, the closing credits on these television shows. When it's over, the episode's over, I move on. So one night, I was sitting watching a show and I was about to erase it. And all of a sudden, I felt Lauren speak to me. And I knew it was her. Did I hear her voice? No, because Lauren's voice was a part of her body, and that had been cremated. I felt her voice. I felt her voice in my heart. And we talk a lot about being in your heart in our book. I felt it. I knew it. I knew the cadence. I knew the meaning. And it was just very quiet. She said, honey, don't erase this. Watch the end credits. It was the very first thing, the very first communication that we had. And I was like, okay. So I watched the end credits and then I just started to bawl like a baby, because the end credits had the song, Oh, Oh, Child. Things are going to get better. Things are going to get easier. We'll walk in the rays of a beautiful sun together someday when the world is much brighter. And it was Lauren's first message to me. So that one, Gloria, I remember very, very clearly. I also remember a lot of her humor. Lauren has, and always will have an amazing sense of humor. We laughed a lot, as with most husbands, mostly at me, with good reason. But there were times when I would be down and say, oh, honey, you know what? I feel terrible. I look like crap. And I would hear Lauren say, well, that's too bad. I look great. And I would laugh. There were so many moments like that of her humor. And then there was one moment when she revealed some of herself to me. It was a vision in my head, and it was extraordinary because it was truly a vision of an angel, and a very large one, a very large one. And she took me flying with her. And it was exhilarating beyond words. A lot of the other experiences are very personal, so I'm not going to get into those, but we do talk a lot about it in the book. There's a whole chapter on her humor in the book, and I hope that is some of the moments, Gloria, that I remember the most.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I will tell you this though, and I wonder if everyone else who is having these communications has this experience. There's a very important tell, two of them actually, when Lauren wants her presence to be known. Now, there are moments that I know, because she has told me, you know, that I check in on you more than you think to see how you're doing. But when she wants me to know that she is here, there are two very important tells, which I'm not going to get into details again because they're just us and everyone else has their. I always know when she's here by that. And I have, as I said, I have had glimpses, very brief glimpses of her, but they don't last long. First of all, Lauren is, you know, I just kept trying. I kept talking to her over and over again. Honey, where are you? You know, we talked about this a lot. We literally, she went into, when she channeled, she would go into trances. And when she channeled this, she said, sweetie, you got to write all this stuff down, because this is before she transitioned. This is in April before the January that she transitioned. I want you to write all this down because we need to be as specific as we can be. When she did that, we were very specific about what our afterlife is going to be and what it was going to look like, what it was going to feel like, where it was going to be, how it was going to be. And when she first got in touch with me, and I felt her in my heart, because as I said, she was that, I wasn't even talking to her then. I wasn't reaching out to her then. I guess she found that that was the right moment to connect with me, because she could give me a message through music, which is something that we used to love to do together, to listen to the, songs on the radio and things like that. From that point forward, I just talked to her. And there are times that I know for sure that she is within range. And there are other times that I know she's not. She's off doing other things. And there are times that I just say, okay, honey, look, I just want to say something. I love you. I'm really thinking about you a lot today, but wherever you might be, whatever you're doing, it's fine. And then sometimes she will respond really quickly. It has now become actually pretty easy for me to have those conversations with her. And we have a delineation with us when I really need to speak to her and need her around me, and when I just want to. And sometimes I just say, honey, this isn't urgent, but if you can, I'd love for us to be able to communicate now. And sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. And it's okay. I don't feel rejected. I don't feel like she can't be there, et cetera. So it's really me or her, because sometimes I'll hear her say, that the tell happens. There's actually a physiological phenomenon that happens. And I'll know that she's here, and I'll just say, hey, honey, how you doing? So it varies. I hope that answers the question.
How does she talk to you? Is it like thoughts in your head that are her, not you?
They are feelings in my heart. It's a great question. And thank you for asking it, Sue. It's a great question. We talk a lot in the book about listen to your heart. Those of you who have read the book already know that almost every chapter starts with a quote from a particular movie that has some relevance to what's going on in that chapter. And there is one movie that has an incredible line of dialogue in it, which is "The heart is a mysterious organ. It plays by its own rules." That is something that we took and extrapolated on a lot, which is, it plays by its own rules that the brain often does not understand. And speaking the language of the heart, because the language of the heart is the way our souls communicate to us. It's through feeling. And if you're blocked to that, it's very difficult to be able to actually receive the messages that your soul is trying to communicate with you. It's through feeling. It's through heart. And in my life, it was the whole language of the heart, because most of the films that I have done that are the ones that mean the most to me, certainly Somewhere in Time, certainly What Dreams May Come, are love stories. And we need more of those. When you have a particular love story that is set in this realm, then I think it really resonates with people. And what happens with Lauren and myself is, again, feeling. So I feel it's very hard. The reason that people say, I can't come up with the words, is because there are no words. These words don't exist. This is not about our brains. Our brains are basically computers that kind of spit out certain things and stuff like that. But our hearts are the feeling organ in our body. And that allows me to have this communication with her. Without getting into the whole story of it, in 2011, November 3rd of 2011, I had a heart attack and my heart stopped 4 times. If Lauren had not gotten help there right away, I would not have survived. It stopped twice in the house, once in the ambulance, and once as they were wheeling me in for surgery. When I was in ICU, after having surgery for that, and Lauren was with me, and we were talking, something hit me like a ton of bricks falling on my head. It was November 3rd. When we were operating the Spiritual Cinema Circle, on the 2nd or 3rd of the month was always our mailing date that we would send our DVDs to our subscribers of that month's movies. And it occurred to me that what we had sent out the day of my heart attack was a volume where the feature was called Listen to Your Heart. These things are not accidents. These things are not coincidences. That really kind of invested for me deeply in me, that from that point forward, I really needed to pay attention, much more attention to my heart and much less attention to my brain. So it's really more feeling, Sue, than it is words. I think it's going to be very important for there to be a lot of books about this subject, so that at some point or another, we will be able to say to the world at large, yeah, you know what? You can say that we're all imagining this and that we're all doing it to comfort ourselves and things like that. But there are hundreds, if not thousands, of these experiences that are going on all around the world, right, all of the time. Right. And you can say we're crazy and we're deluded and we're just doing it to comfort ourselves. And you know what? We can't scientifically prove you're wrong. Because these are very personal experiences. It's not like gravity that you can go prove by dropping a rock off your roof. This is about belief. And that makes us vulnerable to those kind of critiques. But we did not write this book for doubters. You know, this is not what would be called a mainstream book. Because this is really for people like this group, like your Afterlife Book Club, who have these experiences, who already believe it. I have always said to people when they ask me about the messages and what dreams may come and somewhere in time and things like that, I'm not a metaphysical missionary. I'm not here to change anybody's mind about anything. I respect everybody's beliefs. One of my two dearest friends in the world, and my family understands how deeply important his friendship is to me, is a evangelical Christian. And he is devout in his beliefs, and so is his entire family. And we obviously have very different beliefs about what God is, what the afterlife is like that. But there's never any argument about it because he knows I feel what I feel with all my heart and with all sincerity. And I know what he feels with all his heart and all sincerity. And we respect each other. There are certain things that we don't go into in great detail, but he knows that I have these conversations. He's read our book. He's incredibly supportive, even though we have diametrically different ideas. Gee, wouldn't it be wonderful if that could extend into our politics? Anyway, get into that. Yeah, you know, and that's a great point, Gary, because that is an objective experience that anybody can check. And I was around dear friends when it happened. So Lauren transitioned in January. We first started communicating in February of 2018. Neil, and I know many of you have read the Conversations with God books. Neil and I became friends when What Dreams May Come came out in the theaters, and we invited him to come to the premiere, and we just connected on a very, very deep level, and we became very, very dear friends. There was a moment very early on in the process, and I know many of you relate to this because you had your own experiences of this kind of thing. I called him one night, and I was crying so hard. I missed Lauren so much, and this is before the contact was initiated, that I literally couldn't speak. And he waited a few minutes in his incredibly patient, loving way. And I finally blurted out the words, "Neil, I am out of my mind with grief." And in his inimitable way, he said, "Well, that's good." And I was like, "What?" And he said, "You need to be out of your mind and in your heart." That led me to this entire lead up that I'm about to talk to you about. So in September of that year, I lived just outside of Portland, as I said in the beginning, in Oregon. I used to live in Ashland, where Neil lives, and one of our daughters lives in Ashland. So I went down to Ashland for a visit at the end of September of 2018. It's very important to note that Ashland was going through, that whole Southern Oregon area was going through an enormous drought during that period of time. Hadn't rained in a long time. It was September 28th, 2018. Anyone that wants to look it up or Google it. So we went to dinner. I went to a restaurant that we used to go to together, and I met Neil and his wonderful wife, Em, for dinner. I was facing the windows of the restaurant. They were facing me and the other part of the restaurant. It was dark, and we started talking. And Neil said to me, "What have you been doing?" And I said, "Well, you know, Neil, honestly, I've been doing what you did. When you first started getting the Conversations with God messages, I've been writing and writing and writing. I've got so many yellow pads full of the conversations that Lauren and I are having, the insights that I'm having, etc. And you know what? I have a feeling this should be a book." At that point, right outside the window, there was an enormous lightning strike. And I say this to people when I do interviews, particularly with some people on podcasts who are a little bit more dubious. And I say, go check it out. And by the way, if you want me to put you in contact with Neil, I will. And he and Em will confirm this. There was a huge lightning strike. And we kind of went like that. And that's when Neil said, "Okay, I now know what the name of the book should be. It should be What Dreams Have Come." Another lightning strike. Now, the three of us know we're not in Kansas anymore. We're in a very special moment. And I said, well, boy, all right, I guess I had better write this. Another lightning strike. And then it really hit me, or I had my wife whispering in my ear, which could have been as well, "I have a feeling that Lauren and I are supposed to write this together." Another lightning strike. The rest of the dinner was spent laughing and just being amazed at this experience that we had just had, where the universe just kind of put emphasis marks on, yeah, dude, just in case you need the 2x4 experience, here's your 2x4 experience. You need to write this book. You and Lauren need to write this book. So when I went home and I got quiet and I was alone and Lauren and I started communicating about this, she immediately said, "Honey, that was not me. I can't do that." But it was a very clear message that we do need to write this. So what are you waiting for? Let's write the book. And we did.